Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504(c)(2), Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
I'm Lindsey.
And I'm Mike.
And we're here to talk about West Side Story, starring Ansel Elgort, Ariana DeBose, David Alvarez, Mike Faist, Rita Moreno, and introducing Rachel Zegler. Based on the Broadway classic by Arthur Lawrence, Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim, and Jerome Robbins with the update. Directed by Steven Spielberg. Mike, first off, welcome back to Film Strip. Welcome to 2022 with us here. Do tell folks about all the cool stuff you've got going on your podcast, Amateur Auteurs.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I've been a guest on your show before, and as a sneak back, this is also going to be recorded for my show as well. It's going to be really exciting. But all the listeners, I'm sure there hasn't been anyone that hasn't heard this name yet. But just in case, Amateur Auteurs. It's mostly a podcast with me and my brother when we can find the time. But we're just two dudes that love movies, talk about anything that we want. There is no theme. There's no, there's sort of a schedule, but even after tonight, I was like, well, we're going to put this around. We're going to change this around. So we just literally talk about whatever we want. We talk about musicals, talk about dramas. We talk about old movies, talk about new movies. We do a little bit of D&D in there as well. So got a mix of everything for everyone. So, but yep, that's us. You can find us on iTunes. I think SoundCloud. And as of right now, that's all I know of off the top of my head. But hopefully we can change that in 2022.
Absolutely. Glad to have you back again. Always fun to be on your show as well. And, we had a real fun one there to talk about stuff we were getting ready for the first of the year here. So glad to have you help us kick off the beginning of 2022 here on Film Strip because, West Side Story, you and I, Mike, have been talking about this one coming out for a while since we did like La La Land back in 2021 at some point. And then I drug you in here to do Ready Player One. And we were like, so Spielberg's next movie is this, so we got to come around to it on this one. But what I'm curious about is I want to hear more of your background on West Side Story. But first, I'm going to turn to the person that is really the expert of this thing on the show, and it's why Lindsey is here because, as we talked about before, Lindsey has actual like stage credits and knows acting and knows all this stuff and knows West Side Story pretty well too. So I want to hear your background on West Side Story, Linz, and also what you knew about this movie coming out before it happened.
Where do I start? So I guess in high school was the first time I was really fully exposed to West Side Story and the music from it. We did a lot of music from it when I was in high school choir, actually. So we had a whole like Broadway show type of thing, and we weren't a show choir, but that's what we did. So I became familiar with a lot of the music at that point. I'd seen the original West Side Story movie. It feels like a million years ago now. But we got through that. And going into this one, I mean, I've always been a fan of the show, especially as a fan of Shakespearean theater as well, and remakes and remake movies of Shakespeare, comedies and tragedies. We'll go with Othello, Midsummer Night's Dream. I've seen all of them. I like all of them. My cat's name is Puck. I'm down with all things Shakespeare. So West Side Story being inspired by the great Romeo and Juliet, of course, I delved deep into that. So going into seeing this film, the only thing I had done was I watched the trailer and I read on Thursday. So I saw this the Friday that it came out. So it had only been out for a day. But that Thursday I read a review of it, I think on NPR, and got really excited, got a few tidbits about that. So going into it, I was pretty pumped about it, but I didn't know a lot about the actors who were in it. So I stayed as open-minded as I could.
Very cool. Mike, what about you, your background with West Side Story?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely love West Side Story. As I'm sitting in my apartment, you guys can kind of see it in the video behind me, I have movie posters all throughout my wall and stuff that really means to me. I have, behind me, I have Dawn of the Dead, One Flew Cuckoo's Nest, 2001. Those are like one of my favorite movies. But I also have like icons. I have Stanley Kubrick, I have Rocky, Johnny Cash. But also in the middle of all of this, I have a frame of the original West Side Story of them dancing down the street. So I absolutely love this musical. It's my fifth favorite movie, my favorite musical. So I actually had seen West Side Story through Fathom Events on the big screen in 2019. I was in nursing school, and it was like my end of my first semester. I had a final, my last final, the day before they were showing this, and as the responsible student, I took my mom and saw West Side Story instead, and it was awesome. Like, I can't recommend Fathom Events enough. They actually did another screening, I guess, in anticipation of this movie. I unfortunately couldn't see it. I got my booster, my COVID booster shot. I was feeling a little under the weather, and then I had work, so I was like, "I'll drat." But at least I had already seen it on the big screen. So I love West Side Story, and then hearing of that that Spielberg was remaking this movie. I've said it on Film Strip a lot. I just was not really that excited going into this movie. I've already said my piece on Spielberg. I don't want to retread on and just like get angry again, but yeah, I definitely feel like he's like an old man yelling at the sky on a lot of issues. You can listen to the Ready Player One if you want to hear more of like a thorough, I guess, dissing that I do on Spielberg. That's not saying he's not a talented director. I'm not saying that at all, but it's more his modern pieces are like are frustrating at best, I think, and just kind of like a letdown because he can do a lot more. He just chooses not to. I guess a little prelude going into this movie. But so yeah, at the time of this recording, you guys are gonna get I'm saying off air. I have the freshest take. I walked out of the movie theater 1 hour ago, and I called Brian, my twin brother, where we talked about it a little bit. Literally maybe like 5 minutes before we started recording. So I have some jumbled notes. I have my notes from my phone when I was recording. I was one of 3 people in the movie theater, so I don't think anyone was bothered that I was making notes in the theater. But yeah, so long story short, I love West Side Story. Wasn't huge going into the movie, and actually, Lindsey, I think my rating is set, but whether I recommend this movie is going to be based off of the conversation with you, because I think you can offer some insight that might sway me one way or another.
Okay. No pressure.
I know.
Liz, you got to show everybody, those who might not be seeing the video of this, your notes are all on your order tickets from the Alamo Drafthouse.
Yeah.
You saw this in, right?
Yeah. So anyone who might be listening, I went to see this movie at the Alamo Drafthouse. It is one of those theaters where you can order food and drinks while you're watching the movie. Well, I came and I went to a showing that had very few people in it. And I was ready to, write all my notes down. And it's because you're placing orders while you're watching the movie, they have like these little lights. So I was like, no, it's perfect. I'll be able to have a light to write my notes with. It's already built in there. Well, I forgot my notebook. So I wrote all of my notes on the Alamo Drafthouse order cards.
Perfect.
So yeah, they're all right here.
That is
dedication.
Dedication. That is perfect. So, well, I got to tell my background on West Side Story. So you can all thank Kevin Anderson and Julia Roberts for me knowing anything about what West Side Story was, knowing it was a thing at all. I somehow missed this as a teenager, getting into musicals, things like that. I don't know how, but somehow or another, all of that I just missed it. But I saw Sleeping with the Enemy. And there's a great scene where Julia Roberts, spoiler alert for this movie, is looking out her new window after she's run away from Patrick Bergen. And Kevin Anderson is in his backyard at his next door house singing the Jets song while he's watering his garden. And I just thought, what is that song? Because I would walk around humming it. Once you're a Jet, it just sticks in your head. And I was like, what is that? So I finally looked it up one day, back before there was a Google. I had to go and like research this somehow. I think I asked the theater teacher in high school, like, what is this song that goes like this? And she just laughed at me. She said, that's West Side Story. How do you not know that? So I went and checked the LP out of the library. This is also how old I am. And I listened to it and I was like, oh my gosh. And I just, I loved it. I watched the movie. I think I rented it on VHS or DVD, whatever. And, much to like my parents and particularly my mother and grandmother's surprise that I didn't know what that was. They're like, how did you like come along this far and we didn't show you this? So that's how West Side Story became part of my life, was the Sleeping with the Enemy and Julia Roberts and Kevin Anderson. And that's the weirdest segue I can get into this. So I knew that this was happening, though, 4 or 5 years ago, because Steven Spielberg talked about it. And we'll talk about that. It took that long to kind of get it all together. And we'll get to Tony Kushner in a minute, who wrote this adaptation of this script, because I know, Lindsey, you got thoughts on him. But I knew this was coming at some point. And then when he announced after Ready Player One, like, yeah, I'm doing this, next, I was like, okay, I'm, Spielberg doing a musical. And then I heard something in the pre-production that I can't say didn't color my thought going into this movie a little bit. And it's on the end credit too. I mean, it's right there. That Spielberg was doing this because this was his dad's favorite musical growing up, and so it became his growing up. And he said, if I'm going to do one of these, I mean, that was it's almost like he's sort of like our friend Kurt Fabish now, who just accepts challenges because he's done everything else, So somebody said, well, you got to do a musical, Steven. And he's like, okay, fine. And if I'm going to do one, I got to do my favorite one, right? And when you're Steven Spielberg and you've got that kind of clout and you've made that kind of money and you have that kind of Oscar, just you get them dropped on you like Meryl Streep does, at least nominations, I guess you get to do what you want to do. And yeah, here's $100 million from Disney. Go and make your West Side Story movie. And so he set out to do this. So I knew that going in. And as far as like anybody else, like I know who Ansel Elgort is mostly from the Divergent movies I've seen him in, and some of his DJ work, oddly enough. I did miss the part where like he had some unfortunate news come out that may or may not be accurate, whatever. But I didn't know anybody else in this until I saw Mike Face in the screen, and I was like, oh, it's the Dear Evan Hansen guy. It's Evan friggin' Hansen. And then his dad shows up as the Krupke later from Dear Evan Hansen. But I didn't know anybody else. I Googled Rachel Zegler afterward and found out she was a YouTuber, and promptly asked my 13-year-old niece, do you know who this is? And she said, oh, yes, she's awesome. And I was like, well, that's all I need to know. And so I knew nothing about any of this going into it, other than it's Spielberg doing West Side Story. And I knew he said, we're going to specifically cast Latino and Latina actors for those roles. And we're not going to change the period, but we're going to change a little twist on like why there's a turf war in New York. And I don't know, but I knew there wasn't going to be much else changed other than the choreography was going to be totally different than any of it. And I had seen a stage version of this, kind of like a high school production before. And and Lynn just made a face at me, and I'm like going, did they really change that much? I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. But Jerome Robbins declares that it's all new. And I'm like, but I've seen that dance before. I don't know. So we'll get into that as we go. But that's what I knew about this going in. And Mike, we had a really good discussion about Spielberg for about the first 40 minutes of the Ready Player One episode which is cool. And I tend to be a little more forgiving of him because I am kind of in the bag for him, but I won't sit here and not tell you that his schmaltzy approach doesn't wear thin a little bit sometimes. And I can see a movie of his coming. Like I can see the poster and I'm like, I know exactly. Like I haven't seen the Lincoln movie. I don't need to. I kind of know that story. Like I know exactly what this, like there's no reason for me to ever watch that. I know exactly what it's going to be. Daniel Day-Lewis in sepia tone trying to win yet another Oscar. And that's pretty much what that movie is from what I understand. Also Lincoln gets shot. Spoiler alert. So, I mean, I knew that. I didn't need to know anything else. I was just curious to see how Spielberg would handle a musical and if they would try to do anything different with it. And we'll get into that in a bit. But I want to talk about Tony Kushner, who's doing the screenplay adaptation this time, because I wasn't aware that was happening either until I saw it. And Lindsey, you and I exchanged some texts about it. So you've got some thoughts on Dear Tony, as it were.
Well, I was excited. I love Tony Kushner. I think he's a brilliant playwright. I think he's an excellent screenwriter. And it just so happens that he's one of Spielberg's favorite people to work with. So it makes sense that they would link up for this. And Tony Kushner being first and foremost a playwright, he is an obvious choice to help write the screen adaptation for West Side Story. But I have nothing but very deep respect for him just as a writer in general. So that is one of the big reasons why I was so excited going into this movie.
Yeah. And he did win the Academy Award for Munich and was nominated for Lincoln. And I'll sit here and tell you, Munich's a powerful film. It's not one you can watch just on rotation because it asks you to really feel a lot of harsh reality, but it's really well done. and the script makes it great.
Yeah. And my first introduction to Tony Kushner was with his Angels in America, which I think is a lot of people's first encounter with one of his pieces. But I think that's probably one of his biggest. So, well, maybe not his biggest, but that was definitely his launch pad. So.
For sure. And Spielberg's bringing back Janusz Kaminski, a longtime cinematography partner, to shoot this. And so this is somebody that worked on BFG. He's worked on Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan. I mean, he's been a frequent collaborator of Spielberg. John Williams not part of this, oddly enough. But Spielberg's worked with other music directors from time to time. And so I think they got the New York Philharmonic to do a lot of the music for this, which is, I mean, you can hear it, and it's a faithful adaptation of the original score, I would say. I'm a big fan of that score. We just lost Stephen Sondheim, not that long ago. And so this is, something that kind of put him on the map lyricist wise, but this is definitely a Bernstein score, and you can feel it throughout it. And, as far as, and I don't want to do too much of comparisons to the old movie, but as far as that goes, like that movie lives in a space that we don't make movies like that anymore, and we don't live in that time anymore. And I think that was my most curious question going into this is not only why I do this, but can you do this story and keep it in its period and anybody still care? Like the Romeo and Juliet story will live on forever. Clearly it has. I mean, even friggin' Twilight did it. So everybody's done it. I think Simpsons has, 9 or 12 episodes on it at this point. So it's always something. South Park's probably done some strange twist of it too. Now that I say that, but can you do the West Side Story today and it still resonates? Spielberg will double down and say, though, it's even more resonant nowadays. But I'm like, only if you want it to be. And I think that's one of the twists about West Side Story that has always surprised me is most of the time musicals, even when they're dealing with dark subject matter, Irina and I talked about this on the Dear Evan Hansen review, they kind of leave you with a lift at the end. They want you to go up. And spoiler alert for something that's almost 60 years old at this point, or even beyond that at this point, this ends in a real dark place. Like it is not a happy ending, this movie, and this story isn't. So I'm curious as to, I don't know how well you guys think it resonates still nowadays.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like we mentioned, like why West Side Story, and I guess this might go into a little bit of a rant about Spielberg. Like earlier, you were mentioning like Spielberg wants to challenge himself, and I think that's very noble to challenge yourself, but he does it with a very established, well-known story that is over 60, almost 70 years old now. And it almost feels like, okay, that's the blueprint. That's what we're working with. And like, let's ebb our little pieces into this like story. And what's frustrating to me is like Spielberg can make something new. Like he has that clout. Rightly so. It's not just like the name. Like he actually can. He is a talented filmmaker. He can make an original piece. He just chooses not to, and that's like the frustrating part to me. Here we're getting themes of like gentrification, and then still continuing those themes of poor white people, poor minorities. They're fighting amongst each other, but it's like, are they really the enemy? Like they're just like, do they have anything to fight for except this block of this grid of New York City? And it just feels like it's been done, and that's and one of the things that Brian and I were talking about in this conversation, well, the conversation post movie, was the idea of challenging, and I brought up the comparison of Paul Thomas Anderson and Spielberg. Paul Thomas Anderson, you can watch all his films from Hard Eight or even Coffee and Cigarettes, Magnolia to now, with Phantom Thread, but Licorice Pizza coming out, which I haven't seen at the time of this recording. But, you can see a clear maturing of a filmmaker, someone that is, going from his Coke binge days of Magnolia to this like very slow, matured filmmaker with films like The Master, Phantom Thread, but they're all different. And he challenges himself, something like The Master and Phantom Thread, character studies, but very different in their approach to subject matter. And then, even going far back with, Hard Eight, Boogie Nights, and Magnolia. Like they're all like Coke-filled binges, but they all tackle different subject matters. And with Spielberg, I'm trying to look back and I'm just like, when was the last time you like truly challenged yourself? Like maybe Munich, but
I would say
Lincoln, but that was over like 16 years ago. And Lincoln, I think it works obviously for who he is as a filmmaker. Like, he is an older man. He's just trying to tell this like slow story of like a really historical person. And like, it works in that context, but it is really long. However, here I'm like, if you want to tell a story of, gentrification, of, minorities, oppressed people, it like, that's a story that can work. And he just doesn't. There are especially in today's age where with just everything going on, the political movements that we have, there are writers that can write about this stuff. I've met people just in like the Philadelphia area that are like kind of like struggling bohemians, like Jonathan Larson types that, have these stories that they tell because they live it. But he chooses to retell a story that was told, I would say, like arguably in the film context, like near perfectly in the late 50s, early 60s. So that's kind of me going in immediately after this, like kind of frustrated that, did he challenge himself? I would say not really, but there are things I do appreciate that they were able to wiggle into this piece to make it like both contemporary, but also like, I don't want to say timeless, but we can still talk about it.
I think it was probably less of a challenge for such an established director than it was just him paying homage to this musical that, Jay, I think you mentioned was his father's favorite musical. And he really wanted to dig in and kind of give it a facelift because, yeah, the first movie was great, but it did not age well.
No.
Some Puerto Rican face.
Yeah, there was a lot of brown face in that movie. And
let's say this though. I want to jump in just real quick on that though. I understand that's a fair criticism of it, but let's be honest, the access to brown actors and Latino actors and things, it just wasn't there. Like, even if they'd wanted to do it, they couldn't have done it back then. So I'm not giving those people a pass for that. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying, like, I hear that, but they weren't around. Like, there wasn't a David Alvarez to go get and do that, and now there are, thank God. But that's one thing you got to look at with those kind of criticisms is that they couldn't have done any of that back then. It just wasn't there.
Right. And that wasn't necessarily a criticism as much as just a statement of it hasn't aged well. Like,
yeah, it's true.
You're not going to sit down with your family and watch that movie. How are you going to explain some of those makeup jobs to like a 10-year-old,
Yeah. My niece would not get that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think, and I could tell throughout the movie that, or at least it felt like throughout the movie, that both Spielberg and the choreographers, even though you mentioned that choreography was going to be, quote, completely different, it wasn't really it wasn't really different. But for me, it felt like, okay, they were paying tribute. They were trying to stay as close to the original as they could, but give it some kind of new life to make it more relatable and more engaging for a more current audience.
One thing I know they did is they stuck a lot more closely, and Tony Kushner is really to credit for this, to the stage script. The 1960 movie softens a lot of the stuff, particularly the sexual innuendo and some of the harsher language. They don't really curse as much, but you know what I mean? Like some of the swear words and the racial swears and things like that. Those are the 60s movie sort of softens and glows that, just like it does the makeup on people. The stage play doesn't do that. It goes there.
Yes.
And yeah, so they leaned more into that this time, which I appreciated because I'm a fan of that musical and the play part of it and everything like that. So I like that, and I kind of noticed it as well.
And that's what I was going to ask. Like, I have never seen the stage production of West Side Story, just the film. So like, I was looking at it from that perspective. So like, what were the key differences? Because I did appreciate how this film really stuck to kind of like the ugliness of racism and prejudice. I did appreciate that, although it did seem a little bit more like glossed down and like toned down. I did at least appreciate, some of the, the racial slurs they were throwing at each other just like really easily.
It's all in the stage script. It's all there.
Okay.
And even like the jokes, like I think Anita at one time gets on Bernardo or one of the other sharks or whatever and says, you're calling him a this and a that. You're, a spick saying this to a cracker or whatever. Now you're truly American. Like that's a joke in the play and the play part of the musical. And I appreciate they kept that kind of stuff in. So it's all there. Like the biggest difference I noticed in this one, it was they just reordered some of the songs to reset kind of where they happen. But I mean, again, that's part of like every time a production gets redone, that's part of why you redo it is you want to set it in a different place. The funny thing about this to me, in terms of like being an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, is that the thing about Romeo and Juliet that nobody ever seems to really remember is that those are all super rich people. The Montagues and the Capulets all have money. And the twist of this is like, ain't nobody got nothing in this movie. And they're not, and they add on the layer this time of the New York Housing Authority, all that stuff of the gentrification, which seems to be a much more modern sort of take. Cause that, I don't remember that being a part of any of the original stuff. It was just turf war stuff.
Yeah, I liked that spin that they did. And I thought that, again, that was something that they smartly put in to make it a more relatable movie for our current times. That's something that's very prevalent in a lot of cities. And I think a lot of people can recognize like what they're trying to do there. So.
All right. And it seems like we're getting really, we're starting to encroach upon like the plot and talking about that. So Jay, why don't we get into the plot summary before we get really into our details?
It's 1957, and the recent New York Housing Authority's notice of intentions to relocate the neighborhood's Irish American and recently moved in Puerto Rican communities from the area in favor of a high-rise gentrification has only escalated tensions between the residents, especially the rival street gangs, the Jets and the Sharks. Enter in Tony, founder of the Jets, with his best friend Riff. See, Tony's trying to go straight after a year in prison over assault. And he's working an honest job at the old Doc's drugstore run by Doc's widow, Valentina. He cares for his friends, but he doesn't want to get dragged back into the turf war that Riff and the Sharks leader, Bernardo, are intent on settling at a rumble. To complicate things, Bernardo's young sister has moved to New York to live with him and his girlfriend, Anita. And as she's trying to make her way in this new world, she falls in love with Tony, whom she meets at a local dance. Tony and Maria pledge their love for one another, knowing that their relationship will complicate things. So Tony and Maria decide to run away together, but not before Tony is to intervene at this rumble, hoping to stop the violence. And this backfires horribly as Bernardo and Tony trade fists before Riff and Bernardo engage in a knife fight. Bernardo stabs and kills Riff, and Tony, in anger, stabs and kills Bernardo, and the rest of the gang scatter as the police arrive. The police turn up the heat, and Anita pleads with Maria to break it off with Tony, though Maria insists she still loves him, even though she knows he killed Bernardo. And Anita goes to Doc's to tell Tony where to meet Maria so they can run away together. However, the remaining Jets assault her before Valentina finally intervenes. Furious, Anita tells them that Chino, Bernardo's friend whom he tried to set Maria up with earlier, was so angry after the rumble that he shot and killed Maria. Tony learns this lie and, believing it true, runs through the street seeking Chino and asking to die himself. But he sees Maria running toward him, not before Chino appears and shoots Tony in the back. Tony dies in Maria's arms and says his goodbyes, and Maria threatens to kill all of them but can't force herself to pull the trigger. We see all the remaining Jets and Sharks gather together to take Tony off the streets as Valentina leads Chino to the coming police and Maria walks off into the night as credits roll. And did I mention there's a bunch of singing and dancing as well? That's the story of West Side Story, as it were. So we've talked a lot about the why in the prelude to this. So I just want to jump right in with you all and get thoughts on the cast, and particularly our two big leads. And I want to start with Rachel Zegler because she is our introducing. As I mentioned before, she's a YouTuber. I don't know her from anything. I've watched several of her stuff now. I understand that she was good, but the one thing I knew going into it, she had already passed one big test because Lindsey texted me and says, the girl Maria's voice is just perfect. And then I heard it, and like halfway through the movie, I pulled my phone out like you're not supposed to do. But there was no one around me, so it was okay.
I was going to say.
Yeah, we will talk about the box office in a minute, but yeah, there was no one around me. And so I texted Lindsey, I was like, you nailed that because this girl can sing. I thought she had incredible presence for a first-time, real actor or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, 100%. She definitely had like the silkiest soprano pipes I have heard in a very long time. I think the better, I have not heard a better voice since I saw Riverdance. And I don't know if you've ever seen Riverdance live,
Yes,
but they
I
also
have.
have singing, and it's the most
Yes.
beautiful vocals I've ever heard. And that is what she reminded me of. And I could just eat it up. I can't sing like that. I can sing, just not like that. And so I'm definitely envious, and I can recognize a spectacular voice when I hear it. And she definitely had it.
Yeah, I really dug her singing. I thought she had good comedy and timing and things too, of playing the frustrated teenager who, she took care of her father by herself for 5 years in Puerto Rico while her older brother was in New York trying to save up enough money to get her to come on. And then she turns 18, she comes there. And what we find out about her, and what you'll know about everybody here, is everybody works a hard job. And I think I've mentioned it on previous podcasts. I have had a lot of weird jobs in my day, and one of which was being a commercial cleaner. So I understand what Maria has to do every night, and just what that's like. And but I also get how you could actually pull a sing and dance number off doing that, because once you get into the routine of doing that, nobody pays any attention to you. You can just go and do your thing. So I was having like a moment watching that, but I thought she had such good presence with everybody. And particularly because Ariana DeBose, that they put opposite of her for Anita, I don't know her from anything, but boy, what a powerhouse. Like, I walked out of this going, she really stole the movie from underneath the leads when you weren't looking. And Anita's a big role, but she was fantastic. I loved her in that. So, Mike, real quick thoughts on Rachel Zegler and then Ariana DeBose.
Oh, yeah. She crushed it. I think I even was kind of liking her presence even more than Natalie Wood. And I mean, we all know that Natalie Wood was dubbed by, I believe it was Marnie Nixon in the original. So, like, I know Natalie Wood sang, but they said, no, it's not good enough. And then they dubbed her. But here, I definitely felt like the spunkiness of the character. Like when she says, oh, like when Bernardo was talking to Chino saying, oh, like, she's a bully, like she's strong, independent. And you actually see that and believe it. So yeah, I thought she crushed it. I can't sing. I'm not much of a singer, but I love music, even though I haven't like studied it or classically trained in it at all, or really any musical background. But I love listening to music, and she's got that that voice that I immediately was like, yeah, this works. It's perfect for this role. And as far as Anita, yeah, she also definitely surprised me in how much she. Like you said, stole the show from our leads here. She was definitely that core, and I think it's also some of, well, at least from what I could understand, like that wasn't in the original. She added that like humanity to the role, or like to the story that needed it, as well as the fury and the fire at the end of it. So I loved both of them. They were probably my favorite of the entire cast, and we'll get to, I guess, the Jets in a moment here. But as far as these two, they were phenomenal.
Yeah, and Ariana DeBose is a powerhouse actress in musical theater and on Broadway as well. She's been in a lot of Broadway musicals, including Hamilton, and a number of other things. Bring It On. I think she was nominated for a Tony at one point. So she's familiar with the sing and dance and act routine. And you can really see it. I mean, she shines very brightly throughout this whole film.
I'm glad they hired professional, people that have been on theater, and they didn't pull La La Land just to get butts and seats, because that would have really taken me out of the moment.
I mean, having Brian Darcy James as Krupke, and then Rita Moreno as Valentina, which is a new character created for this, because the Doc character is the sort of older mentor, and they play it this time that Doc is dead and his widow is kind of running the old soda jerk store. They create this person for it. Rita Moreno is the original Anita, and so, but was a very different presence. But we should say, like, if anybody had influence on this for Spielberg, it was Rita Moreno, because when he got her to sign on, she didn't just sign on to do this part, which she liked and thought was a neat twist. Her voice that you hear, her song, that's from on the set. They didn't record that in a studio. Like, she did that straight that day. And she became executive producer on this because she showed up every day to like coach the actors and coach them through like, here's how to do this. Here's what, this is supposed to be. And, and just really give them a presence of sort of why this matters. And growing up as a Puerto Rican American during that time, she had like life experience to share with all those actors. But I'll say what you said too, Mike. I appreciated the fact that they got these Broadway actors. I mentioned Brian D'Arcy James, Mike Faced as Riff. Again, I don't know his name like I should, but the second I saw his face coming out of that heavy equipment where he's making out with his girlfriend and he starts singing the Jet song, I'm like, oh yeah, that was genius. And then, David Alvarez has been on Broadway and done tons of, work. And you go down the cast list. If you know Broadway, these people are all over it, and they will be for years. And you can see why, because it's one thing to take an actor, and most actors can do some version of singing and dancing. Like Lindsey, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think they kind of just, you sort of have to do a little bit of all of it at one time or another. And you just get better at some things.
You get good at faking what you can't do.
Right, exactly. Right. As we talked about in La La Land. So
we're not so good at faking what you can't do.
True.
Well, on stage, it's much easier to fake than it is on film. But on film, you get multiple takes. So
exactly.
And editing and
well, and that's the thing is, like you say, on stage, particularly as a part of an ensemble, if you miss one thing, you know it, and your director knows it,
and maybe a couple people in the audience will notice it. But
if they're watching, but most people are just absorbing all of it through all of their senses, and they just get taken out of it, And so, you can hide a little bit better. And they did a good job of mixing in clearly the people that had done a lot of Broadway with the people who didn't and haven't done a ton of that. Now, I think Corey Stoll has done a lot of plays and things like that. And I love him as Shrank. That's a part I love. And I thought he played that very evenly, because that Shrank part can come off like a very ham-fisted, super racist jerk cop. And he's really not written that way. And Stoll played him very straight. His job is to do one thing, to try to keep crime down as possible while they rebuild these buildings, and then he's going to get transferred somewhere else. That's his whole gig in life. And you don't get to be a police lieutenant in New York without knowing how to be political in a lot of ways. And I thought Stoll, having played a lot of politicians, I mean, probably the most famous turn is on House of Cards. He's amazing on that show. Played that really, really well. And you put him opposite of Krupke and Brian D'Arcy James, who has such presence and is so much fun as this little just frustrated man running around. It's kind of like if Joe Pesci could sing and dance, this would be this man. And he does that. They had good chemistry together and worked as characters. David Alvarez as Bernardo is amazing. And that's the thing we should say, like Ariana DeBose, him, Rachel Zegler, they don't talk like that. They don't have natural accent. David Alvarez is from friggin' Canada, so he probably says more like Mike than anything else. And you hear him talk, but they did the good affected. And there's a difference in, like, you can tell real actors that know how to do this stuff when they can put the accent on and it just slips through, and you don't, like, I don't wonder like, oh, how are you faking that? Like they just really do it. Probably the best example of that I ever heard, the guy that played Spike on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I had no idea he wasn't British until like years after the show was over, and I heard him talk. I was like, you're from California? Holy God, that was good. Like, so David Alvarez did a great job of getting his accent right. And then I think he is Latina. I think many members of the Sharks are Latino actors, and it's just natural for them to speak in their natural tone. But I thought he did a good job of affecting that without making it too busy, if that makes sense.
I really appreciate the level of complexity that they're bringing to these characters, especially, characters that were just like plot development people. Like, they were there in the original and maybe the stage. I haven't seen that, but definitely from the first film, they were actually getting like a deeper layer of context to this conflict. Especially, I feel like the Sharks really get like a really heavy context and development through this film. Jets sort of do, which we can talk about that, but I feel like I really do appreciate that the minority group of this film is getting that more added context, being Puerto Rican Americans in the 1950s, 60s, having to go through and then assimilating through into this new land, this new environment that is also changing around them, and like people that were quote unquote native are also having to go through very similar but different struggles. But yeah, and all the actors really, like, they're all at the top of their game. They do really bring out that complexity and the development throughout this film, and I really do appreciate that.
Now we got to talk about Ansel Elgort, because I think we're at that point. If I take a big breath, I'm going to say a compliment before I get into critiquing him, because I do have some critiques. There are times in this when he's not singing, and his singing is fine. I told a friend of mine coming out of this that, like, the singing in this ranges from fine to really good. Like, there's nobody that's just bad, you know. He's definitely on the fine end, and it's one of those, like, we're going to get him through it. And even though I know he's a DJ and stuff, I don't think that's really the same. Doesn't translate. See, if you can sing and then you can sing show tunes, that's a different thing, kids. But he has a presence, though, and it's in his face a lot, that reminds me very much of a young Jeff Bridges. If you've ever seen, like, The Last Picture Show and some of that early stuff with him, maybe even something like Tron, which is a lot more of a dramatic movie than people remember it to be. He has some presence and some character about him, and there's things he does at parts in this script that make me really dig his Tony and like it. And then there's things he does where I just want to hit him in the face with a board, because it's I don't get it. Am I wrong here? Because I feel like it's like that's the best take you had of that. Like, there's just so much, like, wooden, non-emotive response to highly emotional things that I guess I wanted more out of it than I got from him. So I had some problems with the Tony here.
Ansel actually looks very much like the original Tony in the 1960 whatever West Side Story. So I'm not sure if that may be part of why he was cast. A lot of the main actors look very much like the original actors. If I'm not sure if anyone else picked that up, but you know, I agree with your assessment, Jay. There are some very face punchable moments that he has. I think, though, Tony's also just and Romeo, if we're going to bring up Shakespeare, they're just not great characters, period. Like, they're impulsive, and I can't find exactly the words, but I mean, it's like the lead guy and the lead woman are not always the most complex characters. You're going to find the complexity in the supporting cast most of the time.
It's a thing that Romeo and Juliet, in a lot of ways, speak to each other in Hallmark card. That's what and people have criticized, like, George Lucas built the love story of the Star Wars prequel trilogy off of what he thought Shakespeare was, which means he read the cliff notes of a Romeo and Juliet, because that's really how that comes off with the way Natalie Portman is going on with Hayden Christensen, who are both fine actors, but not doing it that. And they knew it was garbage at the time too, so they'll both tell you that, because George doesn't write dialogue. But the same here, and that surprises me, because Tony Kushner can write very good emotive dialogue, and it's not like it's not there in the source anyway too. It's all in how it gets delivered, and the way these two kind of moony-eye at each other, that's part of the story, is that they're dumb kids, and they don't, they're thinking all with the feels and none with the the brain.
Well, their prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed yet, Jay.
This is true, and particularly in a boy who's been in prison for a year. So let's just put that out there, because as a former young man, I can tell you, you don't really have your brain together until you're probably 30. Sorry, Mike. So I mean, that's how it goes. But that's part of it. But and I get that, and if you just sort of concede that as okay, that's just part of being a young boy, that's fine. Then there's what the performance was, which does feel very, and I mean this in all respect, very High School Musical. And I don't mean the movie High School Musical. I mean high school emotive, let's do Footloose, kind of thing. It felt like that.
Yeah, and with Ansel Igor, so he's very okay. I think so.
That's a great way to say it.
Yeah.
So the original Tony, I always took it that he plays this like happy-go-lucky, like very like he's excited that he's turning a new page in life. He's like kind of getting out of the gang life, and you kind of hear that in just how he's singing his songs. With like Something's Coming. Maria, like they're always like, even just how he always has this like dreamy look, like, oh, what's going on, man? With him and in Riff's first interaction where they're just like smiling, like, oh, say uncle, and it's like they're just like palling around. Here, I'd say Tony is like played way more seriously, which I guess makes sense with the context of going to prison. He's seen the like I don't want to say psychotic, but just that like violent nature come out where he almost killed someone, and he's like come to terms with that. And I guess not, maybe, but he understands that he's a dark side, and I think that could work. But then it's just very, I think it's inconsistent in this movie. And also, like, speaking of his voice, I like his voice. I think he can sing. It's just not in this movie.
And paired next to his counterpart of Maria, she just outdoes him tenfold.
He's very like soft spoken in his voice, and what I always envision, like, Tony is supposed to be like literally singing from his chest, belting everything, like his love for Maria, and Something's Coming is. It's not bad. It wasn't. I think like the setting also kind of, we took this big like open number, or like the soundstage in this alleyway in the original, and then we've like shrunk it into this corner store for editing purposes, I guess. Which I'll get to the strange editing and blocking of this movie, but it's very soft spoken. He's hitting more, I guess, lower notes than higher. Like when he's supposed to be belting, he's going, I guess, lower, and it's more like, honestly, it reminded me of Frank Sinatra when he first started singing, like this kind of like low, like jazz loungy type singing.
Lounge, that's the word. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then I thought it worked in Maria. Brian, my brother, thought it. He had the opposite reaction where he's like, "Yo, sing from your chest, dude." And I was like, I kind of like the moments where it's like, say it soft and it's almost like praying. And he like nails that like really like soft spoken singing that I don't think a lot of people can nail. But then, the whole character is supposed to be belting. So yeah, it was very okay, I guess. Like that's like, it sounds like a really like backhanded compliment, I guess, especially as you're the lead of this film. But other songs, I just thought it was just like, oh, dude. Like Tonight, I thought was not good at all on his side. You're like, oh, dude.
The whole soft singing thing. You're not Matt Berninger from The National, dude. Like you can't do that. Like it. And I realize that that's probably all he can do. That is what he can do. But I'm with Lindsey. You pair that against Rachel Zegler and just this beautiful angelic notes coming out of that voice. And then this big dude is just kind of lumbering these notes around, and it's not great.
Yeah,
it would have worked in La La Land, not in this movie.
Yeah. Well, neither of those leads could sing. That's why that worked.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the other reason why it would have worked in La La Land and not here is that I can understand his choice of being a little more muted as an acting choice, because of he's trying to keep a low profile. He knows what he's doing is wrong. He feels all these feelings, but he doesn't know how to emote. And that is how he's playing it. And on film, that works really well. That subtle emotion works really well on film. And that's what we're watching is a film, but we're watching a Broadway production on film. And in a Broadway production, the bigger, the better. And it just doesn't match up. So it would have worked really well in La La Land. I agree 100%. It doesn't work here because it needed to be bigger to match all of the other performances.
And I think it's everybody else's bigness too. Just looking at the other male performers, Bernardo is very big. David Alvarez is not a big guy. Ansel Elgort is a big, tall dude, especially by Hollywood standards. Yeah. By Hollywood standards,
even they make reference of it at their first meeting.
I even like you're really tall.
She pretty much says, "How's the weather up there?"
Yeah.
I think that was something from like the casting stuff. Like they made a joke about it and they decided to keep it because it was cute. It was a meet cute and it works in that. And if this had just been like your standard issue ensemble rom-com, which there's another one coming, by the way, if y'all didn't know, if it was Gary Marshall, that would work. The problem is that these are characters that have established arcs and there's a whole story, all this stuff. And it doesn't work. And then it doesn't match the bigness of the other male characters. You know, I talked about Corey Stoll plays it low because Schrank doesn't sing. He is a spoken word only guy. And Krupke doesn't really sing either, though he just kind of dance around and do a lot of stuff because Brian D.R.C. James can do that. But you got Mike Faist and David Alvarez in particular are so big. And Faist is a taller guy too, kind of lankier guy, but he's so big and he's got such a big voice and he just can really belt and all that stuff. And it just, when you pair it, even pairing him when they have the fight over the gun, pairing him against Elcourt, it just doesn't, like there's like you're listening to one of these guys during the Cool song is what I'm talking about. Mike Faist clearly knows how to do a Broadway performance and get it on film where it's doing the thing that you would experience in a theater. It's so big. And you see him do it and it just comes off. And like you can see Spielberg and everybody just eating it up, you know. And then you've got Ansel Elgort trying to match that. And he just doesn't know how to. And it's not his fault. It's just not how he works. And so could they have cast better? Maybe. I don't know who that would be. I don't know how you fix that unless you go with somebody, again, who's from Broadway that nobody knows. And that's the problem, is you've got to have a star to hang it around because you've attached your lead female, your big female, to the unknown. We're going to break somebody who's already more famous anyway from being on YouTube. And by the way, has made a lot more money than this movie's made on YouTube. So you're trying to mint her, as it were. You've got all these other, supporting characters who are Broadway, experts and well seasoned, and then you put Ansel Elgort in there, and it's just the piece of the puzzle that, like, by itself is fine. When you add it to the rest of the recipe, it just doesn't mesh.
Well, and that's the frustrating part, because I think the big name is Steven Spielberg. Like, he still he's one of those few directors that you see that and people are going to go see it just because of his decade spanning filmography that has literally changed cinema in every regards of that word. The blockbuster, the dramatic, anything. Like, he is the period piece. He has changed cinema. So he is his name is the star. He is top billed. Steven Spielberg presents, or the Steven Spielberg West Side Story or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's where it's frustrating, where it's like, you can do whatever you want, dude. You can cast that unknown person because you think people are still going to see the movie because of Spielberg. People, you can take all these big risks, because if this movie bombs, guess what? They're still going to hand Steven Spielberg a $200 million check to make whatever the hell he wants. So that's like the frustrating part, is like you've had this decade spanning clout that you have worked your ass off, and now it's like, oh, let's just like challenge ourselves with a musical, but like also play it safe at the same time. And like, so I don't know. I think that there's very little excuse to say like, oh, well, we need like La La Land. I don't agree with it, but I get it. But here it's like Steven Spielberg is the star. His name can bring everyone.
That's an excellent point. And we should say, we didn't mention at the beginning, this is a $100 million movie. So for Spielberg standards, that's actually kind of cheap in a lot of ways, but it only made 15. And I know it's the holidays and we still are dealing with COVID and all of that stuff, but y'all, the new Halloween movie simul released on Peacock for like $5 and theaters, and it made $15 million in an hour. Like that, that's not good.
I think that was actually one of the bigger mistakes of the release of this movie, was releasing it exclusively in theaters. From a business perspective, that's probably was not the right move at this particular point in time.
Yeah. And I wonder if they made that decision back when they didn't account for the idea of, like, they knew variants are going to happen. We all know that, virology, that's just reality, but you didn't know how impactful that was going to be, particularly on the fact that this is aimed at an audience younger than even any of us. And those people are not going to theaters. They don't go anyway, but they're really not going right now. And the older crowd that might have been attracted to this because they saw it when they were kids or whatever growing up, they're sitting around going, why even do this? You know, they're asking the same question you're asking, Mike. Like, you can do all that and this is all you want to do? Like, they're not into it. So who's going to see it? Because I can tell you who was in my theater. It was me, and there was a family of Asians in town, and I know they were Asian because I got to talk to them afterward. They were in town for somebody's, like, 2 people's graduation in the family. It was the whole fam, y'all. We had grandma to, like, cousin, and they were having a blast. They loved it, and I'm so glad they had a good time with it because it was me and them in the theater. That was it. But I was like, who's going to see this? And I asked the people at the theater, because I go there all the time. I'm like, have people been going to this? And they said that's a large crowd for that one. And that's why it's stuck in this little side. And I knew something was up because opening weekend, the Steven Spielberg movie, it had the IMAX screen, which nobody was going to see, by the way. And it had the little theater across from it, like across the aisle from it. And I mean, maybe this thing might hold 100 people in it. And I thought, this is saying, like, the studio knows too. And I think you're onto something, Lindsey, that they could have thrown this out on Disney Plus for like premium for a couple of weeks. And I think people would have paid it $10, watch that at home. Sure.
Honestly, swing it through Prime. I mean, make it available, but people have to buy it or whatever, you know, they have so many options right now, too many options to not take advantage, but they didn't take advantage of it.
Well, this is definitely this connection of Spielberg, which we've talked about, where he is not a fan of streaming platforms. He is like part of the church of the cinematic movie-going experience, which I would prescribe to. However, these people aren't like these filmmakers, the David Lynch's, the Spielbergs. They're not doing anything to change it, to make it better, which is frustrating. Yeah. I mean, I know we've talked about it. Spielberg has gone on being like, oh yeah, like streaming exclusive films should not be nominated for awards or Oscars, which like that, like, that's whatever. Like that's what he says. And as a member of the Academy, I mean, I think everyone's like, yeah, whatever, Steven. But that's the problem. And I guess he's going to die on that hill. And then, you know, no one's going to see these movies. And one of the films I watched leading into this, I watched a few musicals. Some old, some new. Actually, so I'll just list them. I watched, obviously, the original West Side Story. I watched Jacques Demy's Umbrellas of Cherbourg and Young Girls of Rochefort. And just you know, some really classic, one of my favorite musicals of that era. I also rewatched La La Land for the perspective of the modern musical.
I'm sorry, you put yourself through that again, man.
Well, I also watched Tick, Tick, Boom, the new Lin-Manuel Miranda directorial debut film about Jonathan Larson, and I absolutely love that movie. And it seems like a lot of people it's generally very positive reviews, and I would be very curious, and that's Netflix exclusive. I'd be very curious to see if that got released, what would happen, because, you know, Jonathan Larson, with everything with Rent, I think he's still a very popular. I mean, Lindsey, you might be able to comment on popularity of Jonathan Larson more now. But, you know, I thought with the character of Jonathan Larson, the play of Tick, Tick, Boom, and Superbia as well, like pairing those in the same film, and then the electric performance from Andrew Garfield and all the supporting cast, as well as like the really amazing direction of the entire film. That, you know, is what I want to see in modern musicals, but Spielberg chose to, instead of do anything like original or adapt something that was popular that may be more contemporary, he chose to do this. So that's like that's the last I'll say about that. But it's like, who's seeing this movie? And I think it's I don't know. There's lots of different things we could go why it's failing, but yeah, that's the frustrating thing, because I just saw a new modern musical and it was awesome.
This is why I'm pretty sure, though, that, and your NPR reference earlier, Lindsey, is one of the many things I've seen where critics adore this. I'm sure this is going to be another one of those Oscar nominated, and it probably will win awards, movie that doesn't make any money. That is just another in that long list of the critics love it. But I'm curious why critics actually do love it, because the difference between this and the 60s one is that the casting is just more true to life. and is good, but the story's the friggin' same. In fact, it's more raw now, which is, you would think would be more problems for people, but it's not. And I don't know what the what is, you know?
I could see it getting an award for costumes.
Yeah, totally.
And there were some really great cinematography directing moments as well that I think really stood out to me. There was this moment like at the dance where they I think everyone was dancing around Maria and Tony, but they were basically standing still, and it wasn't a time lapse or anything. It was just everyone was dancing so fast, and them standing so still made it look like a dream sequence, which was a really cool effect, I thought. And there was the gunfight we had talked about a minute earlier. That was the first thing when I saw it. I was like, that's a Spielberg thing, because it looks like a scene in the Goonies. And
yes, exactly.
And I wasn't, honestly, throughout the entire film, I was not a big fan of the fight scenes. The dance fighting never did it for me, ever. So I just don't think it translates well. And I feel like with a new movie, they could have done something so much grander. And they just didn't, because really fight choreography is just dancing with a little bit more contact, and they just could have done a lot more with it, I thought, but it didn't do it for me.
I mean,
I'm going to ask. Oh yeah, go finish your thought, Jay.
Go ahead. I got a cramp in my leg. I got to stand up.
I was gonna ask the group about like the editing of the film and like the choreography of just like or the cinematography, I should say, because I thought some places it worked. Like I thought the entire dance hall sequence was really superb. I loved the reimagining of their first meeting behind the bleachers. That was like the one shot. Like there's so many close-ups in this damn movie, and that's a big critique I have of Spielberg in this film is like he doesn't let so many of the shots breathe. And I thought it worked in the dance hall, especially behind the bleachers. You know, all these close-ups, it works because it's a cramped space, and I felt like I was with them. And Brian brought up the point that they were doing their dance from the original movie. And he's like, but why frame it like this and do the dance if you don't see it? I'm like, well, it's an Easter egg. You know, it's them doing their dance, and like we'll recognize that. And like, you know, he says, oh, we watch them like curtsy and bow, but we don't see their legs. I'm like, well, we don't need to. We need to see the chemistry, like their eyes. The actors, Spielberg is giving the actors the stage to literally tell their emotions non-verbally through their eyes and like just really subtle body movements. And it really puts us in that moment. I was like, okay, this works. But then, you know, I mentioned something good where we confine it. Even like with Riff and Tony's first meeting, it's in this dark, dingy storage room basement, and then we move upstairs to like a dimly lit like corner store, and we're cutting back and forth. I thought tonight the number tonight was probably the most egregious of this, because the whole thing, I'm like, why aren't we on a sound stage? Like, why are we not in this big grandiose bombastic fashion? And then we get there, and the dance hall scene was that was the first breath of fresh air. But then we get there, we get a hint of it where these like, you know, there's always a spotlight on Maria. You know, we got the top down angle pushing forward. Like it looks like she's on like the Empire State Building. It looks like she's so high. And then he's climbing up, and then they start singing, and we have, you know, close-ups through the grate. Like the view is obstructed. Like every lyric is a different camera cut, and it's distracting. And then there's like moments, brief glimpses where there's restraint, where the camera is like looking down on a crane, and it has the two of them looking up, and then it cuts back when they start singing. And then when Tony climbs up, you know, we have a really swift camera movement, and it's a wide shot. And then I'm like, oh, just keep it there. And then we get a close up of both of their faces just cutting back and forth, like over the shoulders. And I just found it entirely distracting, because you're not letting the scene breathe. You're not letting, I'm sure the set was spectacular because I saw it in glimpses, but I can't see anything. And I felt like it was like that with a lot of like the fight choreography, which I guess made it a little bit more intense. I thought the fight choreography reminded me a lot of kind of like Coppola's The Outsiders, especially in the beginning when they're like painting over the flag, and it just felt like really gritty, and like they're smashing paint cans over each other's faces, like they're whacking each other with pipes in the face. I'm like, damn, that's like pretty brutal.
And then they break into pot of berets and everything's fine.
Yeah.
Right.
So
that's what took me out of it. That's why I don't like it.
I want to tell you what I noticed with this. I was going to say something. This may be controversial because I'm talking about somebody that's won multiple Academy Awards at this point. The cinematography in this movie is awful. And it's awful because the set direction and the production design is friggin' beautiful. I mean, coming in, the way this movie starts, I felt like I was in Saving Private Ryan in some of the burnout buildings and stuff that they have the shootouts in, and then you realize it's in construction zone. All of that is gorgeous, and it's ruined when we put characters on the screen, and it's got to be right here, like 2 inches from their friggin' face. And I'm so glad you mentioned that about the Tonight number, because I kept wondering, like, how many times did these two kids have to do this? Or did they just have 8 cameras at all times shooting at Peter Berking this and shooting it from multiple angles at the same time? Because it is cut to hell and back. And I don't get why that is the decision to do. I get Spielberg likes people to emote with faces. You're right about that. And that's something in every movie. But the sets and the production in previous films, just think about a movie like Jaws. The majority of the drama of that movie takes place on a friggin' boat with 3 dudes, 3 middle-aged to older guys. So there's a lot of close-ups, but you feel that set. You smell that boat coming through the dang screen. This stuff, I'm looking at it and I'm going like, it looks like something out of an outtake of Ready Player One that's just happening in the background. It just doesn't matter. And it bugged me because I'm like, you've wasted a beautiful set design on lousy cinematography.
There's even a shot when they're in the church. It's just lens flare. Like they're slowly zooming in and they're singing to each other how much they love each other and they're marry each other. But there's the window, the stained glass window in the background is distorting the image. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, and at one point, he moved, like Ansel Elgort moves forward and like blocks it a little bit. I'm like, oh, the camera's focusing. I can see their faces. And then he moves back, and then it's just I'm getting blinded by light, and I just see like silhouettes. And I'm like, that doesn't. I'm like, just do a 180 shot of like do the doorway or something like the long doorway.
There's one place where all that stuff kind of works, and I don't know how they did it because it's a completely different from where it is supposed to take place. The Officer Krupke song, which is a total like laugh break song anyway, that was beautifully done. Like that was perfect because it is a comedy song. It is great. It was physical. It was fun. They used that little holding area in front of the juvie court thing. Like I loved that, and I kept wondering like, why can't the rest of the friggin' movie do that?
I think that was some of the best choreography in the entire film. It was flawless, and they all just performed it to perfection. Also, it's one of my favorite songs in the whole film, in the whole show, period. So I'm a little biased, but I really thought that because it was constantly moving, but not in a way that was distracting or confusing. It just flowed really well.
Well, all the movements had a purpose. Someone was playing a caricature of a real person. You know, I'm going to be the judge. I'm going to be the police officer. I'm going to be the social worker. I'm going to be the shrink. I'm going to be the judge that says this is all ridiculous. And I'm just going to be me to say, like, I am what I am because I choose to be. Like, that's the whole point of that song. But again, it's a comedy song. And it's one of those, like, there's old classic Saturday Night Live where they really were good at physical comedy and stage comedy and improv with sets and pieces and stuff. And Lindsey, you've done some improv, so you know what this is like. It's the ones that can get it right and they use the props right. It doesn't become distracting. Like you say, it's fun. That was fun. But then there's so many other times when the rumble is horrendously done. Like I saw that open up, and I mean, I know that Beat It ripped it off, but the first thing I thought of was like, I just need Michael Jackson and the Eddie Van Halen solo now. Like that feels like a bad remake of Beat It on TikTok or something.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you guys, are you guys like feeling the length at this point? Like there were definitely moments where I was looking at my watch, like, what time is it? Like, where are we in this movie? Because And it's not that the added stuff is taking me out of it. It's actually, I really enjoy the added context and the layers, and even just like blowing up like big like set pieces. I'm enjoying those, but I'm like just looking at my watch, like, damn, like, where are we in this movie? I need to like focus, and we'll get to the Rumble because I got a lot of stuff to say about that too. But I want to ask you guys if you're feeling the length, because when I saw the original with the overture, intermission, everything, it's like 3 hours, like just over 3 hours. I did not feel the length. When I saw Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, a 4-hour movie in theaters, I did not feel that was the shortest 4 hours of my life. So like I can sit my ass in a seat for 4 hours and be fine. But this, I was just like, oh, are we there yet? Like, okay, when's this happening? Which is weird because like nothing's changing, but I'm like not into the movie.
Only because I knew the musical well enough and had watched. I went and found an online performance of it again too, just so I had it in my head a couple weeks ago, and I kind of know the length of it. And I knew they were rearranging songs, but I more or less knew when this song happens, this is about to come. I knew how long it was, so I didn't really notice it. But I'm not going to sit there and lie to you and go like, you know, of all the decisions you could have made, you could have trimmed about 20 minutes out of this and it would have been okay. I think everybody would have survived. I in my head, I'm asking myself the same question I always ask about length. My wife notoriously does not have a lot of patience for long movies. Like the fact that she sat through the Hunger Games movies multiple times was sort of amazing to me because they are kind of long. But this, I'm like, this is the point where Rachel would have checked out. And this is the point where she'd be like, you're still here. And yeah, because it goes on a little bit. But I kind of knew it was going to be long going in. So that was sort of my thought of it. Linz, what about you?
Yeah, I looked up the length of the movie before I got my tickets because I needed to know what time I was going to the movies and how long I could feasibly sit in a movie theater. And I felt the length probably right around the 2 hour mark, or between like an hour 45, 2 hours. But then the last, I want to say 30 minutes of the movie, I feel like flew right by for me. So a lot was going on there, which I feel makes sense.
The one song that goes on too long for me is I Feel Pretty. Because I get what they're trying to do. Yeah. They go through so many layers of the department store and all of this stuff. I just felt, I mean, and she sings the heck out of it. So I'm not going to dog the performance. I just felt like that one could have been trimmed a little bit. I like the Somewhere.
It's not a great song.
It's not a great song either. No, it's not. And it's kind of a silly one, especially when you give A Boy Like That and I Have a Love and you slam them together the way that it's supposed to be done. That's such a powerful song, but it does feel like they are rushing it. And I'm like, you're supposed to step over each other in that song a lot. I realize that, but let that breathe, because that was the other thing too, is they're having that argument in that apartment, and there's like 2 times when they pull up and you see sort of the length of it, of where they are, and you realize how small of the space it is. But so much of that is it's shot right up under their nose, and it's, oh god, it took me out of it. But I would have rather that song go on a little bit longer than I Feel Pretty to go on for another minute and a half than it didn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess we can get into the Rumble, because I liked like the reprise of Tonight. I did like the build up. I was like, okay, like here we go. This is like a huge moment that in like cinematic history we're building up to. How do you handle this? How do you handle this? And I definitely have some choice words for it. In that, so we get there, like it's great setup. You know, we have both the gangs. I really do like the top down shot of everyone walking together.
And in the salt, like the salt reservoir for the sanitation department, I thought was a nice choice. I like that. I like, you know, how they arrived at, like that actually looked like a cool set. They did nothing with it, but it looked great.
I was expecting, like I said, I was almost like after that opening like fight when like the two gangs clash, I was expecting almost, like I said, outsider level violence between like angsty like young adults. Like I was expecting like people to be like their faces thrown into the sand or into the salt, or like them throwing it or like incorporating into the fights, or like someone gets hit and then they like literally pour salt into the wound. Like I was kind of expecting a little bit more gritty, and nothing happens. But when we have Tony and Chino come in, which is, you know, an interesting, I again, adding more, like Chino is the character that gets the most development out of every, like out of every like two-dimensional character, now we have like more added context and layers, and we actually like kind of feel for this guy. He's not just some nameless person that gets a gun to shoot Tony just because the plot says he has to. So I like how like they both go in, and then I kind of like how Tony how Ansel Elgort tries to literally just try and be like, hey, I'm sorry, apologizes, tries to settle everything down by being like soft-spoken and quiet, but then he gets punched a few times and he just goes buck wild on Bernardo, and they fight. And that was when I started to turn, because I remember at least in the movie, I loved how Tony was just so like emotional and desperate, like pleading, like, guys, please don't fight. I don't want to fight you, Bernardo. And even like he's getting punched and beaten around and he's refusing to fight. They're even throwing him back into the circle to fight. And here now Tony taps into that dark side, and he just like he wins the fight. He beats the shit out of Bernardo, and then that moment of, oh my God, I'm back in this moment, and he walks away. And this is where Spielberg doesn't have that restraint to just let the shot linger, because I noticed it just like when he's walking away, Tony's like breaking down, realizing, he tells it in his eyes that, oh my God, I'm back there. And and maybe he even promised Maria that he'd stop the fight. Then Bernardo, was trying to pick the fight again. But Spielberg doesn't linger, so we can't see how broken up Tony is about this. And then the knife just falls on the floor, and then they just pick up and they start knife fighting. I remember one of the first time I saw West Side Story, at least bits of it, I was like 7 or 8. My mom was watching it, and it was right at this point in the Rumble. And I will never forget like that moment when Russ Hamblin, he gets accidentally hit, or I forget the context, but he gets hit by Bernardo, and he just rips his jacket off and pulls out a switchblade, and that glinting light in the blade. I remember at that young age being like, not having context of what's going on, thinking, oh, like shit just got real. And maybe not exactly that, but I remember like thinking like, uh-oh, like what? And then I was like so impacted. And then even further in the original, Tony's like pleading like, guys, no, don't fight. He's even trying to jump into the fight, and they're throwing him out. And that makes, and then that makes it when Riff gets stabbed in the original so impactful, because they're dancing around, he gets stabbed, and then Tony picks up the knife and really impulsively, in an emotional state, stabs him. Where in this movie, I didn't get that impact because there was no knife glint, there was no like, uh-oh, knives are out. Like this was supposed to be a fist rumble, and now like weapons are brought. It didn't help that everyone showed up with chains and bats.
Well, they do have that bit earlier where they kind of agreed that like we would go to at least like bats, but what the Riff and his guys are like, these guys are bringing blades. We know that they're dirty Puerto Ricans, whatever. They always have a blade, and so he has this whole bit where he buys a gun in a bar, and I'm bringing a gun because I know they're gonna have it. I'm going one level above. They're gonna have knives. I'm gonna have a gun, and that's the whole point of Tony trying to get the gun from him, and he ultimately does, and it gets kicked out and thrown away, because it's no part of the Rumble. I think the problem that I had with it, Mike, is that you knew the knife fight was coming. It's that when it happens, it's just like, now we go with knives. And there's no like emotion to it. Like,
there's no dramatic flair.
And I'll tell you, in the stage too, like it's a big deal when the knife comes out. Like it's like, woo, like the music hits.
Yeah,
and
it's like it's
just
different.
Nothing. Yeah,
like people can die, and that's like when Riff gets stabbed here. I do like how it was played here, where he's just like in such disbelief, and then even just the quiet tone of, okay, just pull it out, and then he dies. I thought that was like Mike Faced. He plays it so well, where he's like, oh, okay, this happened, and then when he just picks up the knife, Bernardo just lets him come over. I guess he's in shock too that he actually went through with it, but Tony slowly picks up the knife, slowly walks over, and then stabs him right in the chest. And I just didn't get the impact of the moment here as I did in the original, where it felt like it was such an emotional, like this felt emotional, but it wasn't so sudden, because I literally just watched Tony beat the crap out of this guy, like get on top of him and like Fight Club him. Like he stopped because he realized how monster he was, but I just didn't get the same impact here. It just felt like, a beat that we had to cross off the list. And that's not a good sign, because this is such an impactful moment in the story, in the film. And I just felt like, oh, okay, here we are. Check. Knife fight. Bernardo's dead. Riff's dead. And it's just, that's really so underwhelming.
Yeah. I have nothing more to add to that. Excellent assessment.
The impactful part of it is the very end of it, when they all run away and the cops show up and they pan from the down to the top, and there's just the two dead kids laying there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and that is the tragedy. And they needed to linger on that a little bit more. And I'm with you. When Tony kills him, he should do it in a fit of absolute rage, and he just walks up to him like, okay, as dead-eyed as Jason killing another teenager in part 8 or whatever. I mean, it's just the same sort of, like, there was nothing there, and that's not a singing problem, Ansel Elgort. That's an acting choice. That's what I mean by, like, there's times he does stuff and I'm like, why would that be the take we would go with at that moment? Because you needed to be overwrought with emotion. Because later on, when he's with Maria and she's beating the crap out of him basically for doing that, he's like emoting like crazy. And I'm like,
oh yeah, let's get back to that scene too.
Yeah. I was like, why did you not like do that when you killed the dude, man? Like, I don't know. It just seems so, I don't know. It's so perfunctory. It's just how I felt about all of it. And that bothers me, because that scene is so cool and so impactful in its not only original form, but just in the way it's written and the way it's done. And it just feels so flat, like all the way. And that bothers me too, because again, David Alvarez and Mike Faist have carried the emotional weight for the male side of this movie entirely. And now they are both literally dead on the screen. And so I'm like, where's my emotional resonance guy? Because poor Chino is supposed to be the opposite. Like, he's the other coin of Tony. He's the Puerto Rican Tony. He was a guy who has a past that he has overcome because he's educated himself. He's trying to be straight or whatever. But when it come to shove, what happens? If he picks up the gun, he goes, wild, and he goes wild with jealousy, and it costs him. And then at the end, you see it on his face, but they don't give anything. I mean, they finally give that character something to do, and they give him a story, and they don't linger on any of it. That's the other part. I'm like, for all the 2 hour and 40 minutes we're lingering here, you could have given that a little bit more of a minute than what it got. Because I had to fill in the blank for a lot of that to happen. That's just me knowing the story to know that.
Yeah, and I guess like the next, so then we have like I Feel Pretty. Another point that I don't think I brought it up. I do like the culture that's infused into the story. Like I really love how the Spanish speaking characters speak Spanish and there's no subtitles. So yeah. I don't speak Spanish, and I'm assuming most of the people that had seen the movie don't speak Spanish either. And but so you have to infer through acting what is being conveyed, and I can pick up a few words and knowing the story here and there, but they know when to, I guess, for the non-Spanish speaking audience members, when to drop the phrases in English, so you can if you're not following what's going on, and just through like raw emotion, you can figure it out. But we get to Maria in her apartment, like distraught over the death of her brother. And Tony is just standing there, in there, and she's, you can't come in. You're a killer. Like beating, punching on him. And he says, I'm going to go to the police. And she collapses and grabs the jacket and says, well, if you do that, I'll never forgive you. And like foreturning herself in, as I took it. And then they proceed to sleep with each other, like full on, like have sex with each other, which like even for like Romeo and Juliet, like that's bizarre. Like, that is super bizarre. Like, I just remember in the original movie, she, they like have a kiss, they have their tender moment, like, oh, like we'll still run away together. And then Tony runs down the street, and Anita comes in and says, he killed your brother. But not like post sex do they have that conversation. And it's like within like 30 minutes of her brother's like not even cold yet, and they're like having sex with each other. Like, even I was like, whoa, like, because then we're singing, Valentina is singing
the
song that was originally somewhere. Mm-hmm. And then we cut to them like making out on the bed and like taking their clothes off. I'm like, this is like a double take moment. Like, wait. This isn't, I'm not seeing this, right? Like, I can understand if they're like cuddling and they're just like both emotionally distraught, but they go full like physical with each other, which is very an odd choice to go with. I don't know if that's just me, but that was very bizarre.
I don't know if it was that bizarre. I'm gonna disagree with you there. I think, and let's see. Let's just ride this train for a minute and see where it goes. But
I'm on board. I'm strapped in. I'm ready.
We're going to crazy town, everybody. Strap in. But we're dealing with two very emotional, very impulsive teenagers who think that they are in love, who have both just been through a very traumatic experience, and emotions are like at above sea level. and they just kind of ride the emotions into post-pubescent sexuality, and that's what's going to happen when you get these crazy kids who think that like there's nothing else outside of this world besides, this other person.
I'm going to come down the middle of this. I hear what you're saying, Mike, but I'm more on Lindsey's side of things because I'm going back to Romeo and Juliet. Romeo's cousin gets killed in front of him, and he gets really distraught about it, and he goes and he sleeps with Juliet again. And I mean, it's like, it's part of the story. It's not in the original, like what the original movie West Side Story, because in 1960, man, nobody slept with each other. Lucy and Ricky were in separate beds. How they had a kid was anybody's guess, right? You just didn't do that. So obviously we're going to push that in here, and they didn't push it real far because it's still incredibly tame. I mean, you can see more on a CW show. Goodness gracious. And so it's still pretty tame, but I get it. It's overly emotional teenagers who think they're in love and all this stuff is running wild. And it's like, we got to do something with all this emotion. It's going to go into each other. And that's literally is what's going on. So like, I get that. I didn't even blink at that. What I thought was a neat twist on it is Anita walking in and like how she's sort of like on your side, Mike, she's blown away. Like, not only did you like make out with a dude, but I look at your bed, girl. Like, I know what's going on in here. Like, what are you doing? And I think that actually gives good movement to their double song together. And that's what makes that work. Like the emotion of that all drives. I was okay with that. I want to jump back to one thing you said though, about the Spanish to English and all that stuff. That was a conscious choice that Spielberg and Kushner made, was that if we subtitle it, then we're dishonoring the Spanish language, which is not what we want to do. We want to give that presence, but it's in the script. Like originally that the characters, particularly Anita, is constantly telling other people like, speak English, use your English, and then the cops do it too, like in English, all the authorities in English. And it's not a, we're better than you thing. It's a, I don't understand you and I need you to communicate with me thing. And so, but when they get their emotions running, what do? They roll into their natural language. And I appreciated that. I don't know Spanish well at all either. I can pick a word, here and there. But when you get a real Spanish speaker who can really rattle it, like it's fast. That's a fast talking language. And that's the fun part, is to watch them get into it. And you realize like, I'm not catching any of that, but I still follow what they're talking about. Like I enjoyed that. I thought that was a nice choice and was a good thing. And it's not because it's the political correct choice or whatever you want to call it. I actually think it's a good cinematic choice. Challenge the friggin' audience to, you don't need to know what they say. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm going to be on Christopher Nolan's side. It doesn't matter what anybody says anyway. It's how they act it out that matters. And I appreciated that. I thought that was good. The fact that the two crazy kids ended up, getting it on after some tense moments, I've seen it happen in a lot of movies. I'm not surprised. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, fair enough. I hear your argument. It's still been pretty bizarre to me, but I understand what you guys are saying.
Because you're a logical person, Mike, and you're thinking logically, and you got to remember these kids are not. They don't think logically. So.
That, I was trying to remember that of just like, this is Romeo and Juliet. It's not about the accuracy of human emotion or like how people logically react to things or how people respond to trauma. I'm not kind of coming at it from that perspective. It's more just, I guess maybe I am a little bit, because like I said, even I was like, that was kind of like way out of left field, because then it's almost like a sex comedy, like a teen sex comedy, where they like sit up and like his chest is there and she's like covering her breast, and then like, oh, I gotta go. Like it almost felt like that, but it's not like, oh, the parents are home, the cops are busting down the party. It's, oh, the cops are trying to find me because I killed your brother, and your brother, who, remember, I killed, his girlfriend, who just came from the body identification, is now walking in the door, and I got to get my ass out of here. So, I guess I was coming at it from a more, I guess, logical perspective, but for the most part, I've been disassociating like logic and just like a theater, like story narrative, but that part I couldn't turn it off.
That's true. We need to talk about too the thing that happens with Anita at the end of her encounter with Maria here, and after Schrank interrogates her, and Anita kind of gives this sort of coded message like, I need you to go get my medicine from the doctor, all that stuff. And she goes, and what happens with her when the Jets attack her, as it were, and Valentina has to intercede on that, and you've got the Jet girlfriends or whatever that try to intercede, and they get just thrown out of the building, and they're going to gang assault her, and that is really uncomfortable and pushing. And it's not scary. In the 60s movie, it's in the script though, it's part of the thing. On the stage it plays off a little differently. They just kind of corner her, and you can infer what's about to go down. The fact that they went as far as they did with it, I was like, wow, they really wanted to push that home. And I do think, though, that makes Anita's sort of foot stomp at the end, like, screw America. After I've sang this whole song before about how lousy Puerto Rico is, I would rather go there where I know the gangsters and the villains than here where you hide it all and all that stuff. I liked that moment. And it's where I thought the movie tried to rescue itself, because at this point it had derailed for me. I'll just go ahead and say that. And I thought, well, that was a neat choice and a dangerous one, but for me that worked. I thought, and I think a lot of that is because Ariana DeBose is such a great actor, and Rita Moreno really comes in and does a good moment there as well. I liked all of that. What did y'all think of that?
I loved it. I thought she had an incredibly powerful line too, which I believe she said in Spanish, but she said, I am not American, I'm Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
Right before she stormed out the door. You feel her, who would want to live in that place with those people? But I did not think that the choices in that scene were poorly done at all. I'm with you, Jay. It worked for me. And it was like the descending of all of those boys, and then the other Jets girls like screaming outside was very, very powerful.
Yeah, I'm going to, agree with everything you guys said. That was when I thought the cinematography of the close cut angles, like you're there, you can't look away, you're watching, and like everyone is also like, no, stop. And I did like those moments with the Jet girlfriends where they're like, they understand that something bad's going to happen, and they say, no, get out of here. We don't want her kind here. We don't want her here. But they're standing in front of her. They're not like on the outskirts, like, nah, just get out. Like they know something bad is going to happen, and they get in the middle of it. And then when blows start going, even I love that little detail when Anita and the blonde girlfriend, Gracie, when she tries to grab her hand, and then they rip her hand away, throw her out the door, lock the door, and they start banging. And then, like Lindsey, what you said, when they descend on her, and then Valentina comes up and says, oh, like, you animals, you monsters, and then like the back of her dress is unzipped, and you're like, oh my God. And then that little monologue of, I don't know if that was in the original stage, where it says, I've watched all of you when you were little kids growing up, and you've all grown into rapists.
That's added in. Like Doc sort of chides them, but he doesn't do
like that. I think was the final, like the nail of like, that was all like well executed. And I think that's in my notes. I think I said credit where credit is due. Like the movie doesn't shy away from like the ugliness of like prejudice and racism.
Yeah.
And I literally have, you have grown into rapists, as that was like the final nail. And, some of them looked very, like, what have I done? Like, I think one of the characters was even like starting to cry about, or at least it looked like it, like kind of like the weight, like when the emotion is stripped away, like just looking down of like, what have I done? And then they all just run because they're immature children. I think this movie does also hit home that like they're kids. We didn't mention like with the guns, like, we have this really big setup of, this isn't a toy. This is a gun. Like, have you ever fired it? Oh, like a Colt fires 22s. Like, this is a pretty small hole, but it can leave a pretty big hole in your head. And they put the gun against, like, they like push them around. And then the scene immediately preceding is them playing cops and robbers, like pointing a loaded gun at each other, like bang, 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 I'll kill you.
They're being kids. Like, that's the thing, is like, it's supposed to remind you that they're just boys. Like they have they have no sense of their consequences to their actions, because all of these guys, and that's the thing about the Jets, and you really get it in the songs, and I give a lot of it again to Mike Face and the way he plays it off, because if you're not paying attention to the words, you don't catch it. These guys are losers, and they know they are, and they don't think they're ever going to get out of it. They know they're going to wind up becoming the fathers they hate, and they just kind of accept it, and it's, it's their fate. Whereas the Sharks, the Puerto Ricans, are working hard to not be the thing that they escaped and that they ran away from. That's the juxtaposition of the two. And it's why it makes it such an impactful story, because they're both people in the same situation, but one has accepted it and is letting it keep them there. The other refused to and want to rise above it. But when they boil down to their raw emotions, they do the same awful stuff. And there's one bit of that in the doc thing that's great. And it's in the play too, or in the original piece, about where they talk about how they feel bad about leaving Riff laying in the salt, pit. Like they didn't get him. They just left him there. And now he's in a morgue somewhere. And like, they just feel bad about it and stuff like that. And it plays into what will happen at the end here with Tony, where they come together to carry him off in like this funeral procession, if you will. Like they've sort of come together enough to realize like this has got to end, because this is all that comes from it, is people die, and this is not what anybody needs or wants. But I will applaud the movie for going there with the scene with Anita. And again, a lesser actress could not have carried that and made it work. And they got two great ones in there to pull that off. And it worked out well. And then, the thing is though, she drops a huge lie, and you understand why she does. And she's like, you just tell Tony that there is no Maria coming for him because Chino shot her. And it's like, wow. And, and that's Juliet has poisoned herself. What shall I do? I shall soliloquy for 35 minutes, and then I will, kill myself, as Romeo is going to. And he basically just shoot me, just go out and shoot me. And the only thing, you said Outsiders several times here tonight, Mike, and that movie's not good. Yeah. But there are two great scenes in it.
We got to talk about that, because I actually really like The Outsiders.
Yeah, we'll come back to it another day, perhaps on Amateur Auteurs or Film Strip. But there's two scenes in that movie that are awesome. The Rumble is awesome, and Dallas's end of that movie is awesome, and Matt Dillon's end in that movie is tragic and is amazing. And I felt like they told Ansel Elgort, go watch that on YouTube. Probably Rachel Ziegler threw it on her phone and let him watch it, and then go do that in the street. And I know that's what Tony does, is he runs through the streets yelling. But for a character for an actor who has chosen to really tamp the emotions down so much, for him to run through the streets and just screaming for come and kill me too and all that, it rang completely false to me. I'm sitting there going like, I know that's what you're supposed to do. You're reading your lines. You're doing what you're supposed to do, but I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I don't think that's what you want. And I like the original. I believe it. Tony wants to die.
Yeah.
This guy,
the emotion wasn't there.
Is just not there. It's just not there. And that's so sad, because again, he's given good bits of performance, but there's a lot of it that's wrong, and it's totally wrong here. And so when he gets shot, I'm like, I felt nothing for that. I've seen the stage production of that, and it will bring emotion out of you. You see the 1960s movie, and it's like hard to not cry at that. This, I'm like, and scene.
Yeah, I think that scene could have even been elongated, like trim some of the other ones, but from what I remember the original, he goes around like all the major set pieces and is like, Gino, kill me. And like we see Maria, like they're all like trying to like hone in through his voice. Like he's going through the streets saying like, kill me. Here he goes like 100 yards.
Yeah,
and,
maybe, right? Like his next door. Like
wasn't that the whole thing? They even say like, oh, like if you're trying to find him, like it's this huge like city turf block area that you have to search.
Like
and you find him within 15 seconds of him finding out that he thinks Maria's dead. So I think that could have been even elongated and like bring up the tension of like, well, I mean, even though we know how it ends, like who's going to find him first? And I think that would have been the tell of if the movie worked or not. But like, even though we know how it ends, like build up the tension. Like, oh my God, is Maria going to get there first? Who's going to get there? Even though in the back of our heads we know how this is going to end, there's still like a glimmer of hope. Like, oh, maybe he gets away, but it just happens in a blink of an eye. And yeah, like you said, and scene, sing your song, like sing your little reprise of Tonight. And die, and then take the gun, and this is the scene where I think Natalie Wood shined better at the ending of like kind of closing the whole theme of everything together. I don't remember specifically what Natalie Wood said because I watched the movie like a few months ago or a month ago, but obviously it's like the idea of what she says here of just like you're gonna kill each other for nothing, and takes the gun and points it at everyone. I thought it was much more 99% of the way I'm with this version of Maria until like the final scene. Not to say she did it bad or anything. Like it was good, but I just thought the original with Natalie Wood was a little bit more there. But maybe that was because it had better build up and I was more invested at that point.
I could see that. I really liked Rachel Zegler's speech at the end as Maria. I thought, and maybe it's because she had been so angelic most of the movie, and this was her moment to fully break, and so it felt like a bigger character shift, so that worked for me. And she was just desperate, and there was a moment where I was like, oh, she's gonna die too. Like this is gonna be fully Romeo and Juliet is what we're gonna see here. And then she didn't. Spoilers, but yeah, there was my tension right there.
She does die inside though, because she does this great thing with her eyes where she just blanks, and you just see like the veil drop, and like she's just dark. Like all of everything that she loves is out of her. Her brother's dead. All right. Her roommate is gone. She doesn't know this at this point, but she'll never see her again. And the love of her life up to that point is dead. All that's happened in a day. In a day, this girl has fallen in love. All right. Her brother, she's had huge arguments with him. He's dead. Another guy's dead that she's sort of run into and knows. Her boyfriend is dead. She's seen some stuff. And the fact that Rachel Zegler, again, not a professional actor, whatever that means, like just totally nailed that. And you just see it, like it's almost like they, color corrected it. They just dropped the color out of her face. And I was like, that's pretty amazing. Like it's a dark way to end. I mean, it's a dark ending anyway, but there's a twinge of hope in Natalie Wood's ending. And there's a little twinge of hope in the stage version's ending. There ain't no hope for this girl. Like, I don't know what she became, but there's a dark times coming because we didn't have therapy, for this kind of thing back then, particularly for immigrants. Like, this is be honest, we don't have it for them now either, but there certainly didn't in 1957 or whatever. And you don't know what she's going to, but you just see that her life has literally been destroyed in 24 hours. And it's sad. And it's a very harrowing ending that this movie does not freaking earn. And that's what bothers me, because it's a great moment of performance that is not worthy of the last 2 hours and 40 minutes I've just sat through. That's what bugs me the most about it.
Yeah, even the delivery of like, I can kill because I can hate, like just the delivery of that. I was like, Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's perfect. Cause like you two were saying, like she's this angelic presence, and now it's like the angel's gone. Like now she like knows how to hate, as opposed to I feel like I feel like Natalie Wood was just like that delivery was angry, but it was also like angry and sad and just like kind of not so much pleading, but more of just like wake up, like this is a reality check. Like this could easily be one of you if you just let these petty turf wars that no one will remember. This can be any of you, like almost like yeah, tying everything together. Of this is like the story of like the cautionary tale of like what happens when you just are violent for no reason, unchecked violence. But here, yeah, I don't know, I didn't really feel earned. I like the moment when they pick him up and carry him away as a group, and then we just fade to black, and I was like, all right, I got a conversation in 45 minutes. Let me see if I can collect my thoughts, as opposed to just like reflecting about what I saw.
Is Tony a good actor? I can't tell.
That is a great question, and I think it's a great way to end and segue into our final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So, Mike, Lindsey, what are yours for the 2021 version of A West Side Story? Mike?
Yeah, so it's like I said in the beginning, it's like perfectly okay. I mean, I guess I went into the movie with pretty, I don't want to say low Let's put it this way. I said to Brian, my brother, I'm expecting slightly better than mediocre. So that's like setting the bar really low, as is. So it was better than that, but like not much better. So I have been really getting into Letterboxd. We talked about it, Jay, on my show. Anyone that doesn't know what Letterboxd is, it's just essentially like a database collection of movies. People can write reviews. I've been using it just the catalog movies, as well as just have a database and catalog of things I've been watching new, my DVD collection, things like that. And so you rate the movies out of 5 stars. Immediately, I'm giving it a 2.5 star. So that's like, for me, very like in the middle, like it's serviceable. Like I think a 2 star and below is like kind of bad to like pretty bad, and then like 2.5 is like serviceable, like it did its job, and then 3 and up is that thing. But 2.5 stars is what I'm rating, and I knew going into that was like, well, coming into this conversation, that's where it was going to be. So I said in the beginning, like this conversation is pretty much going to dictate where I land on the recommendation, because I was going back and forth between either a weak recommendation or a weak not recommend. So I guess going with film strips review, I'll say I guess I'll say the popcorn rating is exactly what I had at the movie, like a like a small a medium popcorn. It's not quite like as bad as like a small cup, but I don't quite think it's a medium either. So it's like that in between where like the small, like you could put the medium inside, but it's like kind of piling over, and you probably don't need it, the extra popcorn. So it's like that schmedium popcorn. I guess I just recommended a new. I just created a new popcorn rating. Schmedium.
Been around a while. Nick coined
good
years ago. So
okay, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if you guys had coined the schmedium yet, but schmedium. And
it's
then,
not official, but guests get the unofficial rules. So.
Perfect. So so then a 2.5 out of 5, and I'm gonna go. I guess it's gonna be whatever mood I'm in. So right now I'm in the weak not recommend mood. That's just like my hot take after just seeing the movie a few hours ago. The cast is mostly good. I mean, Ansel Elgort is okay as Tony. I think the performances are pretty good. The cinematography it can be good. It's just the editing, for the most part, I'd say like 80% of the time, the editing just kind of like ruins it. And I do, like I said, I appreciate the unflinching view of racism and prejudice and the effects of that in the movie. Also is like adding the layers of complexity and development to characters that didn't necessarily have it before, as well as just adding more, like naturally injecting culture into a story that is ultimately has a lot to do with culture than I think people realize. So, but all that being said, it's just a lot of moments that take me out of the movie, and ultimately the question of why was never answered for me, and yeah, that just kind of I guess the answer of why was never answered. So I'll just leave it that a week not recommend, and a medium popcorn.
Lindsey.
I will give it a medium popcorn, but I'm gonna spring for the extra butter, and which is, I don't know, I guess in between a medium and a large. If you wanna, so there's not like a schmedium for an in between medium and large.
I'm a large.
So, it doesn't work. It doesn't work as well.
Large.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't work as well. A lot of this movie worked for me, and I feel like I knew what I was walking into. There were some things I wasn't a fan of. There were a lot of things I did really enjoy. The performances of Maria and Anita probably are the high points of this film for me. And that is probably what got the extra butter, but definitely medium popcorn, extra butter. I think I've said my piece on everything else over the last couple hours. So
I want to say this movie comes from a good place. Like the impetus of doing this, it's from a love from childhood and something a man shared with his father. That comes from a good place. And the story comes from a good place too. Let's take some really catchy songs and some really attractive people, and let's talk some real hard truth about racism in America and immigration in America. And let's talk about gentrification and some other things. That's the newer, lay in with Tony Kushner. And all of that is fine. David Newman directing this score does an incredible job. It sounds awesome. Again, the singing in this movie ranges again from fine, Ansel Elgort, to really good, with a lot of those. Probably the high point for me, I think Lindsey, you and I shared that the Officer Krupke song is just so much fun. Like I would just watch just a clip of that and just, it's a good smile for 7 minutes or whatever. I likened this movie to all of the ingredients from your grandmother's favorite recipe. You can get them all, the exact brand, the exact measurement. You might even have her pan to cook the dang thing in. But it's not quite all there because it's not grandma making it, right? That's how I feel about this movie. All the individual pieces in some way or another more or less work. Like I think Ansel Elgort's a really talented performer. I wasn't lying. That whole Jeff Bridges thing, like if he hangs around and can keep doing, he can have a long career as an actor. Probably not as a singer or a Broadway performer, but as an actor, I can see it. Rachel Zegler's a star. I'm really interested to see what she does next and does something not this, because that would be sort of fun to look at. And then all these other people I imagine will have opportunity to do other things, but I imagine they'll make their mint on Broadway like they continually have done, and they're good for them. But all of those pieces, when you put them together, don't necessarily quite gel. It's like me and my friends playing music and stuff growing up would think about like, what's our dream super band? And now as an adult, I realize like, that would never work. Not only because the ego's in the room of rock musicians, but just because like you can't really put Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing with like, Neil Peart's drumming. As cool as that might sound, it wouldn't work. And there's just something about all the individual parts here with the architect of it all, Steven Spielberg, where he can't just quite get it to work. I think he did this as a love letter to, again, something he loved and something his dad, really infused into him. And that's great, but it doesn't quite work for me. And there's pieces of it I would want to revisit and go back and think about. But ultimately, if I want to experience West Side Story, I'm going to go with the original score. I'm going to go with the original movie even before I would ever look at this again. And so I would tell people that are fans of the original this, you probably owe it to yourself to see it, just so you can say you've done it and kind of experienced it. But I don't know anybody's ever going to go out of their way to go like, yes, that one. It might be fun in a few years to go back and see what Rachel Zegler's doing and go like, oh, remember when she was in that Spielberg musical? Like travesty, because that'll be the footnote of this. It's probably going to win some awards. I have no doubt it's going to get nominated for a lot of them, and maybe it deserves a couple, but it's not a great achievement in of anything. It's just kind of there. And that is the absolute definition of a medium popcorn. It's all the stuff that could make it work, but it just doesn't quite get over the ledge. It doesn't completely fail miserably, so it's fun. It is like, oh, you could have been a contender, and you weren't, because you had a lousy left hook and a bad foot, and you stepped wrong at the wrong time. And that's really how I feel about the movie. I mean, honestly, I walked out of it and I was like, it's maybe 15 minutes drive home. Thinking about it, I walked in and Rachel says, well, how was it? I was like, and she said, that kind of says it all. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to change my mind. And I wondered, going through this, and I'm glad we had this conversation, because I think the three of us did see different things at times. And that's always the fun part of doing these kind of things. It's funny to me that we arrived at essentially the same end, that it's fine. It's not awful. It's also not transcendent. It's just kind of there. And, as to does this ever answer its why, I agree with you, Mike. No, it does not. But are there some things in it? Yeah, there's a couple performers that really rise above it. So yes, Lindsey, I agree. There again, I'm kind of in the middle between the both of you here with this one, but I just don't think it's all fire. So yeah, medium popcorn for me. But it's been a lot of fun talking about it with you two for the last couple hours. Thanks to everybody for listening. Mike, tell folks again about how they can follow Amateur Auteurs and all the cool stuff you've got going on over there, and what's on tap for 2022.
Yeah, of course. So for 2022, the goal is to do one episode every week. Now, that's a pretty lofty goal. I have it planned out, but I'll be honest. I've been known to say things, plan them out, start them, and then not finish through with the podcast. So my goal is to, stick through that, do it. I feel like if I talk about it enough, it'll help me actualize and do it. So, so that's the goal for 2022 is, one episode a week, talking about whether a full feature length film by myself, Brian, with guests, of course, or like a short film. I know we talked about Alter, the YouTube channel, on the episode with us, Jay, from 2 weeks ago for me. Mm-hmm. And, and hopefully I can get some D&D stuff out for you guys. That one I can't guarantee, but there will be movie stuff. So you can follow us on Twitter at AuteursPod. You can also follow the show on iTunes and SoundCloud. I'm sure there's something else in there, but I'll figure that out for 2022. And you can also email us with any questions, comments, or concerns at theamateurauteursPodcast@gmail.com. And that's all where we are, Jay. Thanks for letting me shout out the show.
Absolutely. All that is in the description of the show as well, folks. And you can follow the show's social media at Filmstrip Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Look for Filmstrip Podcast on Facebook. You'll find announcements about upcoming shows and a link to our Letterboxd page, which has the entire list of all of our reviews. They're not in written form, but it'll let you know where an episode is. So if you're hunting an episode and you don't want to search through your podcatcher, look there. Or if you want to do like most of the hosts on this show when we're trying to figure out what we're doing next, is have we done that one yet? Just go search the Letterboxd page, and it is all there. Go to filmstrippodcast.com. That'll link you to all the places you can find the podcast: Apple, Google, Spotify. We're all there. Please share and rate the show and leave positive reviews as you can. We had a new positive review just out of the blue in the fall of 2021. And it just made me smile real big. I don't know who you are, anonymous person, but you just said, I've just discovered this and I've been binging all of these. And that just warms my heart, because there's 300 plus episodes there. There's something for everybody, I promise you. But we appreciate that. So share the show on your socials as well. Helps other people find the podcast. We appreciate your support. So for Mike from Amateur Auteurs and for Lindsey, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to this episode of Filmstrip.
Thank you for listening to Filmstrip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Filmstrip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.